Hello and welcome to our quick news update just at the start of July, a few days before Sunak's summer holiday UK general election, where thousands of Scottish voters are going to be out of the country. So coming up in this news roundup, first from the Scottish Government, recorded crime is down, aquaculture production is up, and greenhouse gas emissions also down. So more of those stories later. We're also going to look at the postal vote scandal, the latest from the opinion polls, and we'll have a quick look at European politics and who gets the top jobs in the EU. But first, let's look at the Scottish Parliament, where last week they passed the Circular Economy Bill. Now, this measure aims to boost recycling in Scotland and looks at the successful Welsh model. Their figures for recycling of waste materials are the most impressive in the UK. And so partly this bill tries to emulate what they're doing. Now, to tell you more about it, here's a clip from the debate in the Holyrood Parliament last week.
I think we all agree that there is a real need to accelerate our efforts in the circular economy, and I think a lot of our constituents would like to see more of that type of working across the chamber and more of that consensus politics that I think that the deliberations in this bill exemplify. And at every stage, members have championed initiatives that are leading the way in our own constituencies and regions and others that they've visited in repair, recycle, reuse, the third sector, the local councils that have been innovative, the innovative businesses, and reference to those has really helped to oil the wheels of this bill. And I think that this is going to be a crucial piece of legislation, which is a springboard to the waste managers throughout Scotland of whatever status in ramping up action. Making more sustainable use of our resources in Scotland is fundamental to tackling the twin crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. And during the passing of the bill, we've listened to feedback in the bill. I will do in a second, Mr Simpson. During the passage of the bill, we'll listen to feedback. The bill is stronger in promoting action further up the waste hierarchy, and I thank my colleagues for that, for pushing the government to put more in the bill, particularly to reference more reuse in the waste hierarchy, and be recognisant of the role that reuse, refill and take back has on the whole life carbon emissions of goods, products and materials. And I'll take Mr Simpson now.
Graham Simpson.
I'm very grateful. Can the Minister say, if we were to look in 2 or 3 years' time, what difference this bill would have made to anything? What will we notice?
Minister.
Well, it is my fervent hope that this bill gives the springboard for all the local waste collectors and managers throughout Scotland to come together to share best practice, to have increased targets that are put to us that they want to achieve, or particularly on household recycling, that we are able to know that those councils in particular have got their shoulders to the wheel behind, because they are the ones that have made the decisions in this area and we have given them the power to do so. I want to continue, Ms Boyack. I might be able to take you later on. For the first time, there is a statutory duty to prepare a circular economy strategy and associated targets for Scotland that will embed circular thinking within government and across future administrations.
And that was Graham Simpson, Conservative MSP, asking the Minister Gillian Martin, what will change once this recycling bill comes into legal effect? We should see more attention to the waste hierarchy, which she talked about. That's prevention, reuse, recycle, recovery, and lastly, failing that, disposal, which probably means landfill. Now let's look at that story on aquaculture. News out last week of an expanding part of Scotland's fish farming industry. Production of farmed shellfish, production and sales are both up for mussels, oysters and scallops. Production of mussels last year rose by 13% to over 10,000 tonnes. The total sales value across all the species rose to over 14 million, and that's an increase of 36% on the previous year. Altogether, this trade employs 246 people, either full or part-time. The major site for the industry is in Shetland, although as you can see there's also shellfish production in other Scottish waters. Now let's look on to mainland agriculture, and this sector has to make its contribution to reducing CO2 emissions and other harmful emissions. Again, some new data was released by the Scottish statisticians last week, showing that total CO2 production from agriculture fell by 3%, although it's still 7.7 megatons of CO2. The chief statistician points out that higher fertiliser prices may take some credit for a fall, so a continued reduction can't be guaranteed. Total CO2 emissions in Scotland are on a downward trend. This is from all sources, although CO2 from agriculture is falling very slowly. However, total emissions have fallen by 12% since 1990, but that's mainly driven by the reduction in the herds of both cattle and sheep. Okay, next statistic story. Crime. We do want to see these numbers going down, and in general they are. Crime numbers are down in Scotland. Again, new figures just released last week show that recorded crime is falling overall, although that's not always true when you look at individual types of crime. So first of all, here are the total figures. Now, as you can see, crime in Scotland has been on a downward trend historically. This graph covers the last half century. So all in all, crime is down. Incidentally, last year's figures show a 4% increase to 73,000 recorded crimes, but that probably means that crime, along with other legal activities, slowed down during the pandemic, so that 4% is actually a bounce back right afterwards. However, the overall trend is still down. Now, when you look at individual categories, the picture is not so simple. As you see, most types of crime are going down, but sexual crimes have been increasing, although that increase does seem to have slowed down a bit in recent years. By the way, the crime against society measure refers to illegal activities such as illegal drug taking or intimidating witnesses. One worrying trend is the increase in cybercrime, with just under 17,000 crimes reported last year, and that's up from 15,000 the previous year, so that's an increase of 14%. By the way, that 29% figure, when we look at crime numbers, the Police Scotland thinks that most crimes are not in fact reported to them. So you have to be cautious about putting too much weight on the published figures. However, for the crimes that have been reported, Police Scotland can claim a clear-up rate of around 54%. That compares with 53% the previous year. News for Scotland is a digital programme maker set up as a not-for-profit company based in Glasgow. We began creating these videos in April this year, and we want to make more on a variety of topics of interest to a mainly Scottish audience in Scotland and further afield. So thanks for watching this show so far. If you like what we are doing, you can help. Firstly, if you want to hear when we have a new show out, all you need to do is to click on the subscription button at the bottom of this YouTube picture, and then you'll hear when new shows are being published. Also, we don't get any public money, we're volunteers here, and so we're asking viewers if you could chip in a few quid to our GoFundMe appeal to help us to buy more equipment and to travel to locations to make more programmes. There'll be a link to that below as well. So it would be great if you could join us and help News for Scotland to grow. After this boring UK elections out of the way, we are setting our sights on the next Scottish election, which is May 2026. Now, here's an example of the kind of stories we'd like to do more of. It's a story of an archaeological dig on Islay, which has just come to an end. Orstad on the Ruins of Islay has been for several years the site of a big archaeological investigation by the University of Reading and Islay Heritage. As you can see now, there's nobody at Orstad. Researchers didn't find any evidence of the Viking settlement, although presumably they were there because the place name is clearly Nordic. The remains, however, do suggest a thriving small settlement which, before the clearances around 1850, could have supported maybe 50 or 60 people. Researchers from Reading University think this site was busy drying out badly, and the stone channels you can see here were underfloor heating systems with a fire pit at one end and flues allowing the air to get in, so it was really quite a complex construction. Over 40 students spent the whole of June at the dig, and last week this project came to a close last Thursday with the filling in. After the research team has taken its photos and gathered some samples for carbon dating the protocols to put things back the way they found them. And here we see some of the students putting back the earth which they previously laboured to dig out. So that's the filling in stage, and the project is finished. We are planning a feature on this fascinating look at Islay's history, and the research team have kindly offered to share some information and photographs. So when we get those, we'll aim to put it together into a show to get out by the end of July. On to Europe now, and as we suggested in our last quick news show, it looks like Ursula von der Leyen will again be president of the European Commission to serve for the next 5 years. In a deal agreed last week by ministers from all EU 27 states, she keeps her job because her centre-right group, the EPP, won the most seats in the European Parliament. The next largest group, the Socialists, supported her nomination, with Antonio Costa, the former Prime Minister of Portugal, becoming President of the EU Council. The third top job is High Representative, which is basically the EU's Foreign Minister, and that goes to Kaja Kallas from Estonia. Some critics have suggested that Kallas, outspoken against Russia's attack on Ukraine, will not be very diplomatic when it comes to negotiations with Vladimir Putin. However, most EU members did support those three nominations, with the exception of right-wingers Giorgia Meloni in Italy and Viktor Orban from Hungary. However, those names do go forward, and the EU Parliament will have the final say when they meet to ratify or to refuse the trio in the middle of July. And the next decision following the EU elections of a few weeks ago is who will be actually on the European Commission, and that's one commissioner for each EU member state. It's up to the member states to put forward their own commissioners. Now, last time Ursula von der Leyen requested a gender-balanced commission, but that didn't actually happen. But it's up to individual countries who they put forward as their commissioner. Okay, I suppose we better look at the UK election now. Normally we at News for Scotland are quite excited about big political events, but for various reasons we just can't get very engaged with Sunak's bold plan to hold an election just a few days after thousands of Scots went on holiday because the school term ended last week. One reason is the assumption that Labour are going to win easily, at least south of the border. So it's not a contest when you look at the vote in England, and of course Labour always wins in Wales. There it is that Labour doesn't have a big, exciting message to inspire people, and none of the big parties, including the SNP, has an inspiring leader. Labour also promised to be very conservative in their economic policy, insisting on maintaining a balanced budget which rules out any increase in public spending. The IFS, Institute for Fiscal Studies, warns that there will have to be big spending cuts under this policy, unless Labour puts up taxes as the SNP has urged them to do, but Labour has ruled that out too. In Scotland, however, the result is nowhere near as clear as it is in England and Wales, where you can put your money on a big Labour victory. Here, it's very close between the big two, Labour and SNP. Most polls this spring has shown Labour ahead, up to 10 percentage points ahead a couple of months ago. More recently, a Labour lead of 4 to 6 points has been more typical, with some recent polls showing the two parties neck and neck. It remains very difficult to say who will win the Scottish election with just a few days to go. We have 57 Westminster seats now in the Westminster Parliament. That's a reduced number, so the Scottish winner is the party who wins 29 seats. Now, as many constituencies in the central belt of Scotland are SNP Labour marginals, you could see as many as 30 of them going to Labour. On the other hand, if the swing is fairly low, the SNP might hang on to most of their MPs. Commentators on both sides of the border have been wondering what effect the election will have on the Scottish independence campaign. As this graphic shows, support for independence has remained solid, and in fact the most recent poll shows 50-50, 50 for independence, 50% for staying in the UK. Turnout and voter apathy will decide this election in Scotland, and it's about whether potential voters for Labour or SNP can actually be bothered voting. Labour's huge lead in the polls is not matched by a wave of enthusiasm for the Starmer project. In fact, one survey this weekend suggested his Labour Party could win a huge Westminster majority on only 32% of the popular vote. In Scotland, where many voters are on holiday right now, thousands have not been able to get their postal votes in time. It's not much use coming home next week to find that your ballot paper has been in the letterbox while you were away. And on top of that, this is the first full election where voters may be turned away if they don't have the correct photo ID. We at News for Scotland will be voting, and we urge you to vote also. But to vote, you have to bring something like a UK driving licence or a passport. If you don't have those, various other documents will be acceptable, and we'll put a link to the full list of documents again in the comment section below. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching News for Scotland. If you want to discuss the topics we've raised here, we'd be interested in hearing your opinion. So if you make a comment below, we'll try and get back and respond to you as quickly as possible. Thanks for watching News for Scotland. We'll be back soon.